And welcome back. Let's get to some exciting coding using Webpack. Now remember, Create React App uses Webpack underneath the hood. So let's see what kind of setup they have by trying to build one ourselves, or at least a simplified version of it. So first thing we want to do is let's just make a simple project. We'll just make directory, we'll call it Webpack project, and we'll cd into that as well. Now the very first thing we want to do is set up npm, so I can do npm init with -y, which means just say yes to all the configurations. All right, and we have everything set up. Let's clear this. And now let's just open up the project to make sure that we have all the files that we need. I use Sublime, but you can obviously use whatever text editor you choose. And let's make the screens nice like this together so we can see everything. Nice, perfect. All right, so we have our Webpack project with our package.json file. Not much in it for now, but this is a good start. Now the whole served single page application that we're going to build is going to contain two files, an HTML file and a JavaScript file. While the JavaScript file is going to be generated automatically from all the other files that we have through Webpack later on, we can start and create the HTML file manually as an entry point for our application. So we can simply just make another directory here. We'll call it build, or let's just do dist for distribution. And we'll cd into that distribution, and we'll just create an index.html file. Perfect. If we check over here, we have our index.html file. Let's go back to our root of the project here. In the index.html file, we can just simply create a simple basic HTML template. I can actually in Sublime Text do this, and then if I hit tab, it'll auto-populate for me, which is a nice little feature. We'll give the title of Webpack. And within the body, because we are going to be using React, and we need some sort of an entry point for React, we can just have a div with an ID of, let's say, app. And we can close that div. And we can also have a script file. And this script file is going to load our bundle.js, which we don't have yet, but we're going to make. So we'll just say that the source for the script file will be in the bundle.js. All right, there's our nice and simple app. We're going to have an entry point for React, and we're also going to have all our JavaScript files in one called bundle.js. Now, you'll use Webpack as a module bundler and a build tool. Moreover, you're going to use something called Webpack Dev Server to serve this bundled app that you have in a local environment, so that we can run a command here and we can test out our app on our laptop. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to actually see it in the browser. And then finally, we also need the Webpack CLI, or command line interface, to configure our Webpack setup. So let's install these three packages so we can actually start using Webpack. We can do npm, not there. We can do npm install. And because these are for development purposes, we can just say -- save dev. And within here, we're going to install Webpack, the Webpack Dev Server, so we can actually test out our project locally. And then finally, the Webpack CLI. Let's install this. And while this is installing, I want to warn you, with this video, if you're not used to Webpack, you're gonna feel a little, what's the word here? A little exhausted from all the packages we're gonna install, all the setup. It is honestly overwhelming when you first start. And this is exactly why Create React App exists, because setting this up and configuring everything and making sure everything is up to date is a big, big task. So watch this video not as you have to know everything, and if you don't understand everything, then you can't move on. Watch it as a way to understand a little bit of what's going on underneath the hood of Create React App. But as I said before, keep in mind that configurations always change. So when the time comes for you to implement Webpack, they have great documentation online that you can use. But for now, just understand the why of Webpack, not every single detail, as I always love to say. All right, now that we have this installed, let's clear this. And the first thing we want to do is go into our package.json file. And within the scripts here, we're going to change the test to start. And we're going to say that, let me make this smaller so we can see. We want to remove this dummy text that they have. And we're going to put in here Webpack dev server --config space and a file that we don't have yet that we're going to build. It's going to be called webpack.config.js. And then --mode development. Oh boy, let me make this a little bit smaller. All right, that was a lot. Let me explain what's going on here. The script over here defines that you want to use Webpack dev server with a configuration file called webpack.config.js, which we're going to create. And the --mode development is actually a new feature that came with Webpack 4, which was recently released. And this just adds the default Webpack configurations, which come with the new Webpack. Before, we actually, with 1, 2, and 3 version of Webpack, we didn't have this, and you had to do even more manual setup. Luckily, with version 4, they've realized that people don't want to necessarily do everything by hand, so they have some nice defaults. So they have one for production as well, which is very, very helpful. All right, so now that we have this set up, let's save this. And within our terminal, I'm going to create this configuration file. So we're going to say touch webpack.config.js. And we see over here that we have webpack.config.js, and I have a nice little plugin that gives me a symbol over here. Very cool. All right, now let's go to this file because we can't really do anything yet. We're going to go to the file and we're going to add the Webpack configuration. And this is where most of the Webpack magic happens. Within here, the first thing we want to do is say module.exports. And then there's three main things we want to add to the exports. One is the entry, which is where do we want Webpack to start looking through our files. In our case, this entry is going to be a index.js file that we're going to create. So let's say in the source folder, it's going to be the index.js file. And then the second thing, we're going to say that the output, which is from the entry, start reading all the files and bundling everything out, and all of your output, put it into this location. And we can do that simply by defining an output with a path, dir, which is the directory name that we currently have, and use our dist or distribution folder right over here. And then we're also going to have a public path. And this public path is just going to be like this because this is just the URL to the output directory resolved relative to the HTML page. Again, you can read up more about these on their documentation page. And then finally, we want the output to be the bundle file. So we want to say that file name is going to be bundle.js. Awesome. And the last thing is going to be something called the dev server. So this is what we want to run while we're working on our website locally. And the dev server will have a content base with the distribution folder. So this tells the server where to serve the content from. So from the distribution folder when we're working in our local environment. All right, that was a lot, but overall, the big picture is that there's an entry, there's an output, and we also tell the dev server where to look so that it displays the website for us when we're working on it. So again, we're just saying we want to use the source index.js file as the entry point to bundle all of this imported files. We need the bundle.js, so we're gonna go through everything index.js. Anything that's imported through there, we're going to compile and spit it out into a bundle.js. And then we're going to generate our already set up dist folder as the serving point with the index.html file for our app. So we're missing the source folder here, so let's do that. I'm going to make dir source. So we have a new source folder. And within here, we can just go into the source folder and create the index.js file that we have in our Webpack config. Let's go back. And just for fun, in the index.js, let's just say console.log, and we'll say Webpack wizard. Very exciting stuff. All right. Let's run npm start and see what happens. I'm going to say npm start because if you remember, going to package.json file, we have this Webpack dev server command that we're going to run. So I'm going to say npm start. All right, so we get some output here, but at the bottom we see that we have compiled successfully. And if we scroll up, we see that the project is running at HTTP localhost. So let's do that. Let's go to localhost over here and do 8080. All right, and we have Webpack wizard in the console, which is working. There's nothing displayed on the page because, well, our HTML page doesn't really have anything. If we want, we can just have a h1 tag that says Webpack here, just to make sure that it's working. And if we refresh, there you go. We have Webpack with Webpack wizard working. Very cool. So again, we see that the content is being sent from the dist folder and that our time of building was, so bundling everything took 337 milliseconds, and that we have a bundle.js file that we created that is quite small with just 300 kilobytes. Very, very cool. All right, now let's get a little bit more deep into the topic here. We also need something called Babel. Babel enables us to write our code in ES6 or ES7 or ES8. And with Babel, the code is going to get transpiled or changed back to ES5 so that every single browser, without having all the ES6 features already implemented on them, can still interpret it. So we're writing as developers in ES6, putting it through Babel. It's going to spit out the exact same code, but with ES5 version, so that all the browsers, no matter how old they are, can still implement it. So we can still use cool things like arrow functions and object destructuring. Another cool thing is that you can also test out new upcoming features of JavaScript that haven't even been implemented yet. So let's start off with that. Let's set up Babel into our Webpack project. I'm going to close this and clear. And I'm going to say npm install. Again, we'll just say save dev because we're only doing this on the dev side. When we actually put it out into the public, we don't need Babel because we're doing this before putting the files onto a server. So let's just say here, we're going to need something called, Babel core, which is the main Babel package. We need something called Babel loader. And a loader is something that is used in Webpack. It compiles code. So Babel loader in Webpack works to take JavaScript and take it through the Babel compiler. And then we need something called Babel preset env. And this is a cool package that what it does is it checks whatever browser we're running in. And based on that browser's version and how old it is, it will know exactly which features they haven't implemented yet in the browser and make those changes to ES5 for the browser. So it's smart enough to detect the browser and only change the piece of the code that the browser doesn't understand. All right, very cool. So let's install that. All right, awesome. So we have Babel installed. But additionally, we might want to use some more experimental features of JavaScript, which can get activated via something called stages. So what does that mean? Well, if we go to the Babel website, and let's close this for now, we see that we have different preset stages. And these are things in JavaScript that are proposed that might or might not get implemented. But if you're really, really eager, you can start using them by using Babel preset stage. And again, because Babel transpiles our code, that means we can write whatever we want. And as long as Babel understands it, it's going to spit out the version in ES5 for us so that all browsers understand it. So for fun, right now, let's say that we also want to test out a new feature of JavaScript. So we'll say npm install, and we're going to download a package that is Babel preset, let's say stage 2. So we can install that. So now that we have all these packages, how can we use them? Well, we go into package.json, and in here we can add a Babel property. And in here, we can just say that, and make sure we add the comma. The presets, which is what we just downloaded, we'll have 3 of them. So let's go back here. It should be an array. And within here, we'll say that we have the env preset. We're also going to use the stage 2 preset. And you know what? Let's add one more. Again, if we want to use React in our application, we also want the React preset. So again, in here, we can just npm install, and instead of preset stage 2, whatever we just got, we'll say that we'll get preset React. So there's a ton of these that you can use. And now we'll have this one available to us as well. This last one is for us to be able to transform JSX files, which sometimes comes naturally with React, to JS files. So it's more for a sake of convenience than anything. Let me clear this. And yes, we can reload it. Oh, and I forgot to save it. So let's go back here. I'm going to copy this. And again, we'll just put it down here, our Babel setup. And make sure we save it this time. All right, so now we can go back to our Webpack config and we can tell Webpack to, hey, also use Babel when going with the entry, and before you output everything, put it through Babel and transpile everything. That's very easy to do. We can add a module here to tell it what to do with our modules. And within here, we just have to mention a few things. So the first one is rules. So what rules do we need it to follow? So the rules are going to be to test. So that is to look for files. And we're going to use some regex expression here that are JavaScript. Or let me use brackets here that are JavaScript or JSX files. So those are default React files. And by the way, you can look at these syntax. This is regex, and you can learn about the syntax, but we're pretty much saying anything that matches .js or .jsx, so pretty much all JavaScript, we wanted to use the Babel loader on it. So run it through Babel. Now, we obviously don't want to do this with our node modules. You can see our node modules folders, there's a ton, but those aren't our files, those are third parties, and we're not interested in them. So I can just say exclude, and we'll exclude the node modules. All right, perfect. And then the other thing I want to also do is I want to use resolve. And this is something that you may have noticed when we were working with Create React App. When we entered a file, a component file, we never put the .js at the end because Create React App automatically knew that that was JavaScript. So this is done using something called resolve. And we can just say that with resolve, we want the extensions of JS and JSX to be left off and just assume that it's going to be a JavaScript or JSX files. So we never have to do .js when importing at the top of the file, which is nice and nifty. All right, so let's save that. And all right, we're not done yet because let's say this is a React app. We need a couple of packages for React, but these ones we already know. We can just do npm install. And this time, these ones are going to be saved not for dev, but they're actual dependencies of the project. So we don't need to do -- save dev. We can just say we want to install React and React DOM. And I can't spell. Let's try that again. React DOM. All right, awesome. We have a React installed. That's great. We're getting closer and closer to how Create React App works underneath the hood. That's good. So now we can use React and all that JSX goodness into our files. But another thing you might remember is that we're able to use something called ESLint, or every time we ran Create React App, anytime we had a syntax error or anything like that, it displayed it in our terminal, which was very, very helpful. And they use something called ESLint, which is linting. That is checking your syntax, making sure everything checks out. Think of it as a spell checker. And it allows you to maintain a consistent JavaScript and React code style in your project. And pretty much any company you work at uses some sort of linting. So to do this, let me clear this first. Again, as you can imagine, we're installing more things. Again, it's a bit of a headache, I know. Because this is for development purposes only, we'll say save dev, and we're going to install the ESLint package. And while this is loading, you might have realized for now, because we're using Webpack, we need something called loader, that is to have all the files go through this. They go through Babel to get them transpiled to ES5, so it's compatible with all browsers. But we also wanted to go through ESLint to check for any mistakes. So again, we need something called ESLint loader. All right, and now we can use this in our config to make sure that it goes through the ESLint. Let's do that by adding another rule here. And actually, I made a mistake here. This should be an object because, well, we can have multiple rules. So let's put that there. And the next one, and we'll say that here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to copy these properties, except this time, we want to use the ESLint loader, again, through our JavaScript files. So let's start our application and see if this is working. I kind of went along without checking my work, so we'll see if I made any errors here. I'm going to run npm start. And I got a bit of an error here. If we scroll up, we see that I made a silly little mistake here. I need a comma after the dev server. Let's save that and start that again. And we have another error. I am full of mistakes today. There you go, another comma that I've missed. All right, so it's compiling now, but it says failed to compile. All right, and I want to show you something that's quite tricky with Webpack and why so many people get frustrated with it. So I purposely made a few mistakes in here that if you look through here, well, it's not really clear what's going on. I mean, I see that I have no ESLint configuration, but there's also all this other stuff happening here. And it just says module not found. And again, this is one of those things where you really want to make sure that the syntax that you use in Webpack config is really, really correct. That's why looking at their documentation and checking out their example is really, really important. For example, here, we actually need for the resolve in the extensions to have dot in the front. And then with the tests, with the regex, well, we actually don't need the dots because we have this in front as well. Let me save that and let's try this again. All right, I still get some errors, but if I scroll up, I don't have all those module errors, and it looks like I get one error of no ESLint configuration found. That's pretty standard. ESLint needs some sort of configuration, some sort of rules that we can tell it, hey, check for these types of errors. Again, another configuration file. I told you this can get pretty hairy, but it's just the way it works. So with ESLint, it's very simple. We can just create something called an RC file. So we can say touch.eslint rc. And this dot over here makes it a dot file. And the RC means that when the project starts up, it's going to read the ESLint RC and set up ESLint so that whatever rules in there, it's going to instantiate. Now, I could do the same thing with Babel as well. Instead of putting it in package.json as I have it here, I could have just taken all of this and created a .babel.rc file. But for now, we can leave it there. For ESLint though, let's create a new ESLint file. And within here, to start off, we don't need anything crazy. We're just gonna leave it blank and just keep the default syntax of defining rules like this, but keeping the object empty. I'm going to save, and let's start this again. Woohoo! Everything seems to have loaded, and it all looks good. Again, we have our localhost 8081 that is distributing our app. So let's go check it out. All right, everything looks nice. Ignore the 404. This is just a favicon that we don't need to worry about, but Webpack is working. And if we go to the network and refresh, we see that we get the bundle.js file that has all this extra thing that Webpack comes with in order to work the way it does. Within here, we have our console log that tells us to print Webpack wizard. Very cool. All right, are you getting a headache from all of this yet? Because we have one more thing to add. You see, you have to use something called Babel ESLint in your configuration so that our linting also includes ES6 and ES7 and ES8. So once again, we've done this before. We're going to clear here and just do npm install. And again, save dev. And this time around, we're going to do Babel ESLint. And again, I can't spell. Let's try that again. Babel with an L. And again here, now that I've downloaded this, I can use another property called parser. And this parser will have Babel ESLint. All right, let's save this and make sure it still works. npm start. And, well, I forgot a little comma over here. Let's try that again. And everything is working, but now we have Babel ESLint working as well. Let's try something fun. Let's say that I want the rule no console to have a warning. Let's save that, and I'm going to run npm start again. Check that out. We have a warning because the rule says that we don't want any console statements in our JavaScript file. So if I go to index.js, we have a console log statement, which sometimes in production, you don't really want. Maybe you don't want to log out whatever errors you have to the user. And now I've added this rule that says, give me a warning if there's a console. Very cool. Can also do error. And if I do error and start it all over again, I get an error for using a console log statement. Very cool. Similar functionality to what we had in Create React App. But now we also have this ability to lint new ES6 features. Now, adding rules by yourself line by line is tedious. And as developers, we don't want to do things that has already been done before. Luckily for us, you don't have to specify your own set of rules every time. There's plenty of recommendations out there, and you actually already used one for React using Create React App. A really good one that I like is the Airbnb style guide. Airbnb open sourced its ESLint configuration, and it's quite popular. A lot of projects use it. A lot of big projects use it. We can actually just install it. So again, going back to our console, since we're downloading everything, we can do npm install -- save dev. And we want to install, let's say, the ESLint config Airbnb. And let's say we want a few more features. Perhaps we want to make sure that with ESLint, the import statements and export statements work. In that case, we would download plugin import. And let's say we also want to make sure that we have linting to make sure that the code has accessibility in mind. That is, it's geared towards people who have screen readers viewing web pages, so it's accessible to everybody. And we can use a plugin there that is ESLint plugin JSX ally, and so on and so forth. All right, typing with a mic in front of you is not the best idea. We made another type error here. Let's fix that. Now, you see over here, it's a lot of plugins and configuration. And luckily for us, there's a lot of tools out there and a lot of documentation on how to do this, best practices. But again, this is what's happening underneath the hood with Create React App. All these smart developers are working for you to set this up in the best way possible for you. All right, so now that we have this, let's just add the Airbnb ESLint one just for now. I know we installed a few more things, but for now, just the Airbnb one. We can just simply say extends. And these extends whatever rules we have with an array of whatever ESLint rules we've downloaded. In our case, it is the Airbnb base rules. Again, this is something that you can read up on when you download the package. You go to their GitHub and check out the ESLint config Airbnb. I save this, run npm start, and you see that because we've extended our rules, we have a few more errors. We have the unexpected console statement, which we've added, but also we have a missing semicolon error and a new line required at the end of file. Let's go back to our index.js, add a semicolon and a new line at the end of the file, save it, and look at that. Automatically it updates to just one error, which we created, which is the console log statement. But everything is working. Ignore some of this stuff. If I refresh, we get everything, but we get that error of the console log statement that we've said before. All right, let's go back to our Webpack config. What have we learned here? Well, we learned that Webpack is pretty complicated. Luckily, they have really good documentation online that you can read up on. But the main principles stand. All we're doing is we're creating a bundler that takes all our files, in our case, index.js. If index.js had import statements that lead to another file, and that file had import statements that lead to another file, well, it would read through all of those through the entry that we gave it. It would then run through those modules and test out if any of them end up in JS or JSX extension. We're going to run them through Babel. And then we're also going to lint them as well. And finally, we're going to output that to a distribution folder. And for developer purposes, we can also have a server running like we had here, and it constantly checks to make sure that our website is lint-free. I think that's enough Webpack for now. We all need a break after this one. Hope you had fun. I think this is probably the toughest part of the course to really get. I personally think that configuration like this in the future will be less and less important as the community moves towards less and less configuration, because as you can see, it's a lot of headache and you're not really coding. You're just following the documentation of a library, which personally, I'm not the biggest fan of, but it's up to you. It's still a useful tool. My recommendation, use Create React App. If you ever need to customize your Webpack, you can run npm run eject in Create React App, and they'll give you access to this webpack.config file. For now, I need a break, and so do you. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.